Russia is now experiencing a very rapid economic crisis. This is, of course, not news, but I looked through the latest reports. The situation really is grim for Russians. For now, though, the crisis is in a kind of latent stage. It's August, vacation season. Things look quiet, nothing seems to be happening. But economists who write about the state of the Russian economy, including Russian economists who even support Vladimir Putin's regime, are all throwing up their hands and saying something absolutely unprecedented, frightening, and terrible is happening. For example, a report just came out that the Central Bank of Russia has recorded the sharpest drop in money flows in the economy. In July, incoming payments processed through the central bank's payment system fell by 8.1% compared to the average level of the second quarter. If you adjust for inflation, the decline is even deeper, about 10%. In other words, the amount of money moving through the central bank's payment system has fallen by 10%. What does that mean? Simply put, people and companies are paying each other less for goods, for services, for anything. In plain language, economic activity is freezing, stopping. Previously, say, 1,000 rubles a month were being transacted, now it's 900. So people are buying less, and with inflation taken into account, even less than that. We're seeing a 10% contraction in monetary transactions in the Russian economy. Next, there's a sharp decline in rail freight. We're talking double-digit figures, 12 or 13%, I don't remember exactly. Any economist will tell you that a sudden drop in rail freight volumes is an absolutely objective indicator of economic decline, especially in the industrial sector, because all goods and components have to be transported before they can become anything useful or before they reach store shelves. If rail freight volumes are plunging, it means the economy is cooling and contracting. Production is getting smaller and smaller. Road haulage has also collapsed by 10 to 15% in recent months. The reason is the same. Fewer goods are being produced, so there's less to transport. That's it. Vehicle sales, including trucks, have fallen to a 10-year low. Passenger cars are sitting in inventory. No one is buying them, too expensive, unnecessary, because the economy as a whole is stalling. People have less money. Russian auto plants have already moved to a 4-day work week. What does that mean? It means a 20% drop in auto industry output. That's what it means. Steel production has also fallen by roughly 20%, and steel workers' incomes have declined accordingly. At the same time, there's another very important piece of news. The Russian industrial holding Semros, which produces building materials and is the country's largest producer of construction cement, will also switch to a 4-day work week starting October 1st. That means output in construction will also drop by 20%. When the leader, the top producer in construction, makes 20% less of this and that, it means construction overall will be 20% lower. That's a very bad signal for the Russian state and government because they have poured absolutely colossal amounts of money into developing Russia's construction sector. They hoped it would become the locomotive of the Russian economy, just as construction long served as the locomotive of China's economy. Russia is, in many ways, cosplaying China. They hoped they would get the same result as China did in development, but so far they've gotten the same result as China's real estate sector in decline. Both burned out, bubbles burst, and now comes a very serious economic hangover. We see a general fading, a halt in business activity everywhere. Everything's a mess. It's as if the Russian economy plowed into a concrete wall and is visibly starting to fall apart. Someone will say, but there's oil. In Russia, oil is everything, and oil always saves the day. That was true until recently, but now the situation with oil is becoming downright dire. According to Russia's Ministry of Finance, oil and gas revenues in July of this year fell by 27% compared to July of last year to just under 800 billion rubles. Adjusted for inflation, the drop is even steeper. The main prop under Russia's economy is being kicked out because oil and gas are the backbone of the budget. That's how it has worked. Most of the money, foreign currency, comes from oil and gas. Russia has long understood this is not healthy, and even this year the government planned to collect more from the oil and gas sector, raising taxes and various levies. But the economy is shrinking, profits are falling, companies are suffering huge losses. There's nothing to tax. Non oil revenues are also a mess. The situation in the Russian budget is simply catastrophic. Initially, the annual deficit was planned at 1.3 trillion rubles. Then they raised the target to 3.8 trillion, but by early August, the actual deficit had already reached 5 trillion rubles, which is more than $70 billion. 70 plus billion dollars is a lot of money. There's nowhere to get it, and yet they still have to pay soldiers and pay for tanks, machine guns, missiles, and everything else. They're short by 70 billion, serious money in dollars, not rubles. By year end, economists estimate the deficit will be 9 or even 10 trillion rubles, unless things get even worse. 9 to 10 trillion rubles is about $150 billion. One way or another, that 150 billion has to come from somewhere. Where there aren't many sources, they can print it, they can take it from bank deposits, or they can cancel pensions and public sector salaries and so on. No one is lending to the Russian budget anymore. They can seize money from depositors' bank accounts, but only involuntarily. Each of these options has obvious downsides. If you take depositors' money to fill the budget, you destroy the financial system. And the financial system is the circulatory system of any economy. No economy can live without it. Plus, in Russia, most bank deposits are held by very wealthy people, friends and relatives of those in power. The decision to confiscate would not be made by any parliament elected by the people, but by the top tier of the Russian authorities, which means to finance the war, they would have to pull their own money out of their own banks and send it to the war. They don't want to do that and likely won't. They could cancel pensions, I can believe that, but that would risk unrest, ugly scenes, maybe even riots. They can also print money, but that would mean massive inflation that would burn the economy down, dissolving it like acid. I actually think that's how this ends. They'll print the money, and as I've been saying for a long time, Russia will be defeated not by tanks, guns, and machine guns, but by inflation. I think Russia is destined to go down the inflationary path that will ultimately ruin it. So Russia faces a gigantic problem due to the budget shortfall, and there's no solution. What's more, the situation could get worse precisely because of oil, the thing that always used to save them. Why? Because Ukraine has now begun, very actively and quite successfully, to hit Russian oil refineries with drones. In just the last couple of days, the Afipsky refinery in Krasnodar Krai was blown up, along with another smaller refinery in the city of Slavyansk na Kubani, two refineries in 2 days. Before that, within a week, huge refineries in Novokuybishevsk and Ryazan also went offline after Ukrainian strikes. They supply oil products to the European part of Russia, including Moscow and St. Petersburg. All this happened at the height of the harvest and tourist seasons, when demand for petroleum products is very high. Naturally, wholesale fuel prices spiked immediately, even though the economy as a whole is contracting, and in a shrinking economy, prices should be falling. But no, prices are rising. At least fuel prices are rising. Inflation, rising prices alongside a falling economy is the worst combination. It's the scariest thing there is. It's like a fire and a flood in a hard freeze all at once. That's what's happening to the Russian economy right now, and Ukraine's strikes on Russian refineries have ensured it. I suspect these strikes will continue because the results are extraordinarily good. Inflation in Russia is ramping up quickly, and not only that, because refineries are offline while crude oil still has to go somewhere. Russia has sharply increased exports of unrefined crude to world markets, which has pushed oil prices down. So, if you keep hitting refineries with drones, you not only leave the Russian Federation without gasoline, triggering mid level inflation, You also deprive Russia of windfall revenues from expensive oil because the oil gets cheaper as a result. It's a double benefit for Ukraine, while the drone costs pennies and yields benefits in the billions of dollars. Right now, even attempts to push oil prices up haven't worked, not even after US President Donald Trump imposed sanctions on India. In essence, he introduced a 25% tariff on any goods from India as punishment for Indians buying a huge amount, about 2 million barrels a day, of Russian oil. The Indians are loudly protesting, saying they have pride, they're not from the trash heap, and won't obey US demands. The Americans are demanding they stop buying Russian oil. India says it's a great power with its own relations with another great power, and the US has no right to interfere. Besides, Europeans and Americans themselves buy some Russian goods. So, what is this nonsense? Yet, amid all this talk, we see that the Indians seem to have decided to give in to the pressure and comply with US demands. The largest state owned refiners, one called Indian Oil, the other Bharat Petroleum, have already purchased at least 22 million barrels of non Russian crude for September and October. They've begun large scale purchases of foreign non Russian oil, mainly from the Persian Gulf, the United States, and Brazil. Brazil in South America also produces a significant amount of oil. So, US pressure seems to be working. I think in the end it will work because I've read that even private buyers of Russian oil in India are gradually returning to their pre war suppliers in the Persian Gulf. They started buying Russian oil only when the price fell sharply due to European sanctions. In short, India's free ride on cheap Russian oil is ending, and they're returning to their old suppliers. For quite a while, several years, they had a golden reign of ultra cheap Russian oil. Now the faucet is being shut off, the Americans are pushing hard, and India will have to buy at world prices, not below them. I think the Indians will grumble but agree because they gain far more from trade with the United States than from low oil prices in trade with Russia. And if it works with India, and I think it will, the Americans will move on to pressure China. Such pressure, well prepared blackmail, frankly, works almost always. Old fashioned blackmail is a reliable tool against those who resist. The blackmail would be, look, thanks to discounts on Russian oil, you get, say, $10, but from trade with us, you get $1,000 in the same period. So, dear Chinese, choose what matters more, $10 there or $1,000 with us. And even though China claims eternal friendship with Russia, strategic partnership, boundless cooperation, $1,000 is obviously much better than $10. Pragmatic Chinese will likely choose $1,000 over $10 and stop buying Russian oil. As we can see now, even with India's decisions to cut Russian purchases, global oil prices are not rising. So you can turn off the tap for the Russian Federation without any major problems, let's say without significant problems, and completely make it so that Russia cannot sell its oil on world markets. And this, of course, is a mortal threat to Vladimir Putin and his regime. It's literally the needle in the egg that holds Koshchei's death. Deprived of the ability to sell oil on world markets, Putin loses his main source of foreign currency and budget revenue. These are the funds that generate other funds. Oil revenues flowing into Russia's budget have a multiplier effect. They multiply, and in the end, you get a large budget. If those initial oil revenues disappear, nothing else follows. Russia will become poorer very quickly and very seriously, by multiples, perhaps even by orders of magnitude. Russia is at war. Wartime spending is rising very rapidly. They have to spend more and more to sustain the war. The economy is declining. Even Russia's finance ministry admits things are bad. And the central bank says economic agents are barely paying each other anymore. When inflation is surging and gasoline prices have shot through the roof, There is probably nothing worse for the budget than losing oil and gas revenues completely or almost completely. It's a severe problem, a disaster. It knocks out the last prop from under the rotten, crooked, rickety structure of the Russian economy. Without that prop of oil revenues, the structure could collapse and fall apart. The entire Russian economy could fall apart. Of course, this won't happen instantly. It would take several months. But in principle, without petrodollars, the Russian economy is not viable. It was originally built on the assumption of a constant influx of oil money. If that money is cut off, that's it. It will bloat and then implode. What in English is called an implosion.